Hello, how are you? Glad you're with us. Thanks as always for tuning into Floor 9. I'm your host, Ryan Miller, and today we're chatting WWDC. After a one-episode hiatus, welcome back Adam Simon to Floor 9. Adam, did you do anything as extreme as any of those transitions during your time out of office?
Transitions. What?
During WWDC, they skydived into the presentation. During the Apple Watch, that guy did a backflip dismount.
Yeah, no skydiving for me on my vacation. Had a lovely road trip through parts of Europe. It was really fun.
Oh, chef's kiss. Mwah. Love to hear that. I have a follow-up query to that extreme sports angle that opened WWDC this year. Do you think we'll see that skydiving helmet that Craig wore in the opening in the Apple Store anytime soon?
I do not think they will be selling it, although Jaws did wear it on stage at John Gruber's talk show live last night, which was pretty funny. And he said it was really heavy, which is interesting. So, like, is it made out of metal? I need to know more.
It looked like a titanium hairpiece.
Yeah.
The most expensive Lego piece in the entire world.
Yeah, it totally has that, like, Lego hairstyle look to it, for sure.
And as Tim Cook would say,
wow, that was so cool.
But before we dive into things too far, Adam, do you want to just give everyone a quick overview on what WWDC actually is?
Yeah, it's Apple's worldwide developer conference, which has been going on for many decades at this point. It's basically early in June, Apple shows off updates to all of their operating systems, which then go into beta and then will ship in the fall. And over the past, I would say, 5 to 10 years, it's also shifted so that not all of the things that they announce at WWDC are shipped on day one, but it's sort of like, here's what's coming in the next cycle. Some of these things inevitably end up shipping later in the year or even into the spring of the following year. So it's sort of giving us a look at most of the features that they're going to be shipping on their platforms for the coming year.
Some great trailers before the main attraction, which we're definitely going to come on to at the top of our conversation here. I think it would behoove us to begin with what most would consider WWDC's most major announcement, and that would be Apple Intelligence. Apple Intelligence is the personal intelligence system for iPhone, iPad, and Mac that combines the power of generative models with personal context to deliver intelligence that's incredibly useful and relevant. It harnesses the power of Apple Silicon to understand and create language and images, take action across apps, and draw from personal context to simplify and accelerate everyday tasks. Now, I know that was a mouthful, so let's just start with a very basic question. Adam, were there any features, or was there one feature that stood out to you as wow, that's pretty cool?
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody's been waiting for Apple to make a move in AI, as the rest of the tech industry obviously has been obsessive about it since ChatGPT really broke through the public consciousness. Basically, I think that was like fall of 22, really, when it had its sort of big viral moment. Apple, does their own thing. They move at a different speed. They're always a little slower and I would say usually more purposeful rather than just throwing the spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks. And that's exactly what we're getting with Apple Intelligence. They have found a position for themselves in the market that allows them to use AI to do things that only Apple can do, really. And then is offering some of the other things that they can't do and or do not want to do as sort of plug-in opportunities for third parties, the first of which is ChatGPT itself. I think it's strategically makes a ton of sense. We'll have to obviously see on the execution side how well it plays out, but their focus on personal intelligence, on using data that your iPhone has and data from apps that your iPhone has, which I think based on it was a little unclear, but I think that the in-app stuff will possibly not be coming until next year. By being the platform owner, it allows Apple access to a lot of that personal information, of course, in a privacy respecting way, but it allows them to synthesize that stuff and help you perform actual tasks and actions on your iPhone using the apps that you already have.
I think that you're right in saying that the app stuff is probably not coming till next year. iOS is only going to be releasing in fall to all users, where beta is coming in an earlier period to a limited subset of users. So obviously developers aren't going to be able to get on those app intent APIs and start building experiences for this kind of new wave of processing on device until next year. I think another great point you made is that this really is only something that Apple can do, the semantic index and being able to be privy to all those processes and services that already happen on device is a distinct advantage that they have with, such a saturation of iPhones, iPads, and Mac devices in the market.
The app intents, the stuff for developers is actually there already because they are, as I think we kind of expected them to, they're building on top of systems that have been in place for other uses for a while.
Mm.
This idea of app intents has been around for a long time. They've started extending it to Siri a few years ago, but it basically, as a third-party developer, allows you to tell the system what your app is capable of doing, and that will help surface actions and also data as part of this new Apple Intelligence platform. So at a very simple level, Apple Intelligence is finally delivering on the decade-plus long promise that Siri sort of introduced when they sort of launched the idea of voice assistants all the way back in, I think it was iOS 4 was the system
Mm.
that shipped with Siri at first. So it's been a long time. Again, none of this is in the first beta, so nobody outside of Apple has tried it yet. But from the demos, it looks like the LLM technology is going to let them actually deliver on that promise that they made all those years ago.
Yeah, I think it was 13 years ago they said that Siri was ultimately launched, and now they've given it a bit of a sexy facelift as well. No longer is she just that little black dot at the bottom of your screen, but it's going to have a very nice, like, Aurora Borealis type effect around the edges of your device. So Siri definitely got a little bit of a facelift. But Adam, are you surprised that they didn't try to rebrand it, just given that they were never really able to deliver on that promise of what they initially offered Siri to be all those years ago?
There was some speculation that they would rename Siri or call it like Siri AI or something as a way to indicate this is a new version. But honestly, I think most people don't think about it that hard. And I do think that the new animation actually is a really good branding update to communicate Siri is not a thing that lives in a little ball and that is just a voice talking to you, but it is just part and parcel of the entire system. And when you hold down that side button to activate it or summon Siri by calling its name, it is looking at the whole system. And I think it very accurately communicates an important part of this where it knows what you're looking at on your phone. So you can say things like, add this to my address book, look up reviews for this restaurant, and you don't have to specify anything else other than that.
Can I just interject really quick? Do you think that on-screen awareness is going to present any kind of issue to people who are ultimately using Siri in that regard? I know that Microsoft had a little bit of backlash or some resistance to the introduction of Rewind during their latest announcement. So do you think Apple faces similar challenges in that regard?
The way that this new Siri and Apple Intelligence operates is not exactly the same as the Windows recall. That was a privacy nightmare because people discovered pretty quickly that it was saving screenshots of your Windows laptop every 5 seconds in an unencrypted way on your laptop in order to do the magic that it was doing. I think that this context, first of all, unlike Windows recall, it's not always watching. It's only looking at your screen when you summon it. I haven't seen really concerns from folks on social media yet, but obviously the people who are talking about it right now tend to understand how these things work a little more. It'll be interesting to see how normal users react to it when it starts to roll out. It also will be an opt-in feature, at least for the foreseeable future. I kind of expect that for all of the iOS 18 cycle, it remains opt-in, that you have to manually turn on the new Apple Intelligence, partially to head off any concerns that people might have about privacy and security and things like that, and partially because I think it's still going to be in beta for most of the next year, and Apple will still be sort of figuring out how to improve it. I do think that there is going to be a little bit of an interesting learning curve. Like, unfortunately, the current versions of most voice assistants do require you to speak in kind of a special context to communicate with them. And I think it's going to take a while for folks to unlearn that and to be able to really internalize things like, oh, I don't have to explain what I'm looking at because it understands what I'm looking at. I do think there's going to be a little bit of a learning curve for most users, even for expert users, to like unlearn some of the weird behaviors.
Yeah, and I think that's like part and parcel to this transition to AI at large. I think a lot of the way that people were using ChatGPT in the initial offset is the same way they would type in a Google query, where it was just like, give me a very specific subset of answers, not realizing that you could be a lot more specific, asked it to have like imagination of its own in some capacity. So I think it's part of our societal evolution and behavioral evolution to kind of move towards this new era of AI processing.
And it is part and parcel with the problem that every AI platform currently faces, in that there's not really an interface for it. And this has been a problem for voice assistants from the beginning, right? It's like you have to learn and educate yourself about what they can do because there's not a set of buttons on the screen like in an app or a web page. And I do think that We'll have to sort of see what the onboarding looks like and how proactive Apple is in terms of educating users of like, oh, this is a thing that you could have done in a couple of seconds if you just ask Siri at this point, because Siri can now do that. We'll have to sort of see how that gets explained to users.
Maybe there'll be some way to opt into tips where Siri will be like, hey, I could help with that, like much as Clippy would have done in yesteryear.
Yes, just what we what we need, a new Clippy on our phones.
Brilliant podcast transition here. Speaking of cute animated avatars, what do you think of some of the more fun features that Apple unveiled as part of this intelligence offering, like Genmoji and the Image Playground?
Yeah, so we were talking about the Siri thing. That's only and Apple Intelligence in terms of taking action inside of apps. That's only one component of the platform. They also introduced a lot of text rewriting capabilities. You can change the tone, you can summarize things, you can make it more concise, and also image generation. They have this Image Playgrounds app and sort of plugin system that kind of just generates AI powered clip art is basically, I think, the best way to think about it. I saw a lot of people hating on this during the keynote and also afterwards. And I understand because it doesn't look amazing, but also like, just don't use it then. Like, I think that it is a lot of these AI features are very smartly done in the sense that I could imagine if no one is using the image generation features, either because they are culturally perceived as being super cheesy and corny, or they just don't like the aesthetic of them, that will just sit there unused for a while and eventually it will get turned off. Like if it's a feature that nobody likes, that happens. Companies ship features that people don't use and eventually they turn them off. So I don't see the harm in it, is what I would say. If you don't like it, don't use it. And if you want to yell at your friend for sending you AI generated clip art, that is a different that is your prerogative. But also, I don't know, people should be allowed to have fun, and if people enjoy making them, I do think that the AI generated emoji, where it sort of mashes together pieces of existing emoji, as far as I can tell, I think people are actually going to really like that. And I think
Agreed.
it is always both frustrating and surprising when you search for an emoji that doesn't exist, and now you'll be able to create one that's exactly what you're thinking of. So
Yeah, and since I know we'll barely touch the surface of it later, I think that was one of the more interesting updates with the iOS announcement, is that you can take some of these custom created emojis and use them as tap back animations in your conversations with friends. So just bringing a different level of customization to the equation in the iMessage experience. That was one of my favorite things.
they're really continuing the trend of the past few years of there have been these like long standing low hanging fruit that especially around like iMessage that they just have not done. And the tap back with any emoji and the send later, scheduling an iMessage to send later, it's like I think they finally knocked most of the low hanging fruit that people have been like, why can't I do this? Every other messaging platform supports this. So I think it's always nice to see those things. Those are actually the reason that people update their operating systems. They're like, I just want to be able to tap back with the emoji, with a ghost emoji, like
Before we move on from some of these creative capabilities inside of Apple Intelligence, I do want to ask, do you think it was intentional that they omitted a photorealistic filter inside of Image Playground, only having like sketch, illustration, and I forgot the third category?
Yeah, it was sketch, illustration, and animated. Basically, it looks kind of like a Pixar character. Yeah, that is 100% intentional. They confirmed that in an interview last night that they just didn't want to get into deepfake territory. And obviously, everybody can install Photoshop and do it themselves, but Apple has the luxury of not needing to do that, because if you really want to do it, you can still use Midjourney or Image Generator on your Apple platforms, but they don't feel the need to bake it into the system, which I think totally makes sense.
Yeah. I want to pivot the conversation here to privacy. I think what we learned about Apple Intelligence is that most processes will be carried out on device, but that does come with a bit of a requirement. Devices are going to require 8 gigabytes of RAM in order to fulfill some of these AI actions. So I think we're going to see a lot of consumers looking for that next upgrade in their cycle come the fall time. And one thing, when the AI can't handle processes directly on device, Apple did make an announcement about something called private cloud compute. Apple Intelligence can flex and scale its computational capacity and draw on larger server-based models for more complex requests. These models run on servers powered by Apple Silicon, providing a foundation that allows Apple to ensure that data is never retained or exposed. Adam, do you think that this is redefining the standard around privacy and artificial intelligence?
I'm hesitant to say redefining just because I don't know that anybody else is going to take a similar approach to Apple. We might see Google do it because they have talked about running models locally on device as well as in the cloud. So I wouldn't be surprised if at some point there's an update to Google's AI that functions similarly. But I think it's leveraging some really interesting like Apple dynamics that make a lot of sense. Obviously, Apple makes high-end premium smartphones and devices that have had neural processors built into them for years now. That I think that the memory thing is interesting. It actually is biting them a little bit because I don't think that they have had the time to update the memory in all of their iPhones, which is why only the 15 Pro and of course we do know from rumors that all 16s coming later this fall will support it as well. But I think that they were caught a little flat-footed. I don't think that this is an artificial cutoff. There actually is a real justification there for why your 15 non-pro kit will not be able to run Apple Intelligence. The story on the iPad and Mac side is a lot better because those have had more memory in general. But I think
Just need an M1 chip, right?
yeah, you just need an M1 in anything in an iPad or a Mac, and it will be able to run Apple Intelligence. The cloud side of things is actually really interesting because Apple, up until this point, they've been running commodity cloud software. They run a mixture of things on Azure, Microsoft Azure, and AWS. And they're like all of the iCloud, all of the Apple TV stuff, all of that backend is pretty commodity, Linux stuff running on somebody else's cloud. For Apple Intelligence, they're actually going to be operating their own cloud servers running variations of Mac chips. The guess that everybody's making is that it's going to be for the first generation M2 Ultras that go up to 192 gigabytes of RAM. And from what we can tell based on the architecture they've talked about, it looks like when your phone or your device has to go out to the cloud because it can't process the request using the local model, it's actually going to make a one-to-one connection to some Mac chip in Apple's data center that is going to process that, send back the results, and then immediately destroy the data and all of the information, which from a privacy perspective is obviously great and something that strategically Google might not want to do. And their models might not be designed to work that way. But I think it's just really interesting as a development. Apple has been not investing in server infrastructure. Actually, some of their chip designers left because they saw the potential for Apple Silicon in the server ecosystem. They left to start another company to do that. And now Apple is actually moving in that direction. So I'm curious from a strategic long-term point of view, like, does this mean that eventually, if you're running a data center, maybe you should do everything in your own data centers? Does this mean that Apple will eventually migrate off of AWS and Azure and run everything themselves? I kind of think that 10 years from now, that will probably be true because it will be an increasing way for them to deliver new cutting edge services in a privacy preserving way. So
And do you think this is a bit of a testing ground for that? Because, it's not going to have the same server load as like an iMessage at the initial offset, whereas opposed to, let's just call it however millions of people in the United States, 100 million, 150 million people that have iPhones. Not all 150 million of them are going to be executing intense Apple Intelligence applications on their phone every second. So they're not going to be putting a massive load on the server.
yeah, it's certainly a place to start with those smaller requests, but also higher performance requests. We've seen rumors that the unreleased M4 Ultras are actually being designed specifically with the data center in mind. So I do think that we'll have to see. But Apple being Apple, it feels like they have not wanted to do this to run their own data centers. And now they strategically found themselves in a place where they had to. But now that you have to, maybe there will be some other product and strategy advantages to taking more and more stuff in-house into their own data centers.
Yeah, two more notes on the private cloud compute and the data centers. On the cloud compute side, they're also going to have independent experts who can inspect the code that runs on Apple Silicon servers to verify privacy and private cloud compute cryptographically. That ensures iPhone, iPad, and Mac do not talk to a server unless its software has been publicly logged for inspection. I know that sounds like a lot of jargon, but basically it means it can be verified and analyzed by a third party to ensure that everything is done in a very secure manner. And on the actual global server side of things and these massive farms. They did say something about them being sustainably built and green and energy efficient. We'll have to look into the exact stats and information, but it did sound like it was near 100% sustainability end.
Yeah, no, they actually confirmed that last night in an interview as well, that their data centers are running on 100% renewable energy. So I know one concern that a lot of the general public has about using AI features is just the immense amount of energy used to create and use these models. Apple, by starting with trying to run everything as much as possible on device, that obviously is shifting the energy load to yourself and in your own choices. But I think by committing their data center to 100% renewable energy, they basically said last night, this is not impacting their goal to be 100% renewable energy across the board from supply chain to your door by 2030, that they're still on track with that goal. So good news for folks who are concerned about the environmental footprint of some of these things. And hopefully that will encourage other companies to invest in similar ways as well.
Yeah, if only everyone could have a similar level of commitment to sustainability, then I think we'd be in a slightly better position. But that's an entirely different podcast entirely. We were talking about privacy, and I think we've kind of touched on a few elements that would allow Apple to shed some culpability around some of these AI implications and applications. We talked about not having the photorealism when it came to Image Playground to ensure that no deepfake creation could ultimately happen. On the larger language model side of things, they're not looking to recreate the wheel and create something from the ground up, but they've actually forged a very interesting partnership with OpenAI to put ChatGPT 4.0, the latest model, on Apple devices. Now, what we know about that is that it allows Apple to kind of wash their hands of things and be like, hey, any of these hallucinations are not done by any of our technology. It's from a third-party outsider. But beyond the privacy application or implication, I should say, what do you think about this partnership in large, Adam? Is there a winner on either side of the equation?
I mean, I think it's obviously great for OpenAI to have access to Apple's user base. I think they're probably hoping to upsell folks to premium subscriptions, and also just, it does just keep ChatGPT front and center in terms of the cultural conversation around AI. Apple confirmed that this is going to be open to other partners. They confirmed they're talking to Google and hoping to have Gemini as another option. I suspect it will work very similar to how search works on Apple devices, where you can choose from among 5 different providers to be your default search when you type a query into your search bar. I think this is going to be a similar approach. It'll be interesting to see how consumers think about these things. I don't think most average consumers really have opinions on Gemini versus ChatGPT right now, but maybe they will next year. And I think that it'll be interesting. You'll be able to sort of directly compare how they're performing. The other thing that they haven't talked about, but that I think is pretty obvious, is this, to your point, it gives them an escape hatch for the kinds of queries consumers might want to make that they don't want to handle because of risk of hallucination or creating deepfakes or things like that. The OpenAI integration and the third-party partner integration lets them hand that off to somebody else, and the blame goes to them when it doesn't work out well. But it also is an interesting way for Apple to see what queries people are asking that they're not currently able to handle themselves. And I would expect that over time, just like with search, a lot of that starts to get carved down and integrated more into Apple's own foundation models. So obviously not the things that are more risky, but I think the things that could be handled by Apple's models over time will get incorporated into them as well.
Yeah, and you mentioned, Gemini as a future possibility of a partnership for Apple to forge. Do you think that they'd be open to other models like Perplexity, Anthropic, or even smaller things where people are able to upload their, own GPTs, if you will, into the Siri knowledge base, into the Apple knowledge base in order for you to be more directly access some of those information sources, if you will?
I do think that the number of partners will be broader than just OpenAI and Google. I'm sure that they're open to those conversations with anybody who has a sufficiently large and functional model. I do not think that there will be the kind of personalization that you're talking about that ChatGPT has with sort of the custom GPTs, because if everything is functioning as designed, Apple Intelligence should already have all of that information and should be able to handle that personalization for you on device. So I think hopefully that it will not be necessary. It'll be interesting to see if there is some way to say, for advanced users, obviously, to sort of download and compile their own like open source models, for example. If there'll be some way to do that, I would expect probably not in version 1, but sort of as the market develops, there could always be an option down the line for something like that.
Do you see this as any sort of keep your friends close, keep your enemies closer kind of tactic from Apple, as OpenAI potentially being one of the dominant competitors in this space? Yeah, I know they don't really have aspirations of building hardware quite yet, but some analysts do seem to think that if there were to be a rival to emerge, it'd be either Google or OpenAI in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, look, there were rumors that OpenAI was talking to Johnny Ive, who obviously used to be the lead designer at Apple, about creating hardware. I definitely think this disincentivizes them from creating their own hardware while still being able to access Apple's user base. And I think they're really trying to aggregate the marketplace of large language models. They're trying to provide the interface to those tools so that the iPhone remains competitive with Android in terms of Google's integration with Gemini. It'll be interesting to see if Google actually wants Gemini on the iPhone or if they hold it back as a way to differentiate against Android. But I think that's why OpenAI was the announced partner, right? As I'm sure there's a little bit of card shuffling and thinking at Google around like the longer term strategy of, do they want access to iPhone users, or do they want to use this as a differentiation point for Android? And just what we know about Google, I'm just not sure that they can commit to a strategy that will see either of those play out in the long term. So I wouldn't be surprised if over the next 5 years we see a little bit of flip-flopping from Google on that position.
So we've kind of dragged them into this fight, and we talked about Microsoft briefly earlier with some of the on-screen capture stuff. How does Apple's strategy differ from some of the other tech giants like a Google and a Microsoft? Do you think this focus on personal intelligence is a differentiator?
Google was going in this direction with their recent Android announcements. Microsoft is going in this direction with their recent Windows announcements, as tends to happen with things in big tech. When Apple comes in a little later than everybody else and articulates sort of their vision for how the market should work, I would expect a lot of these ideas trickle over into Windows and Android as well. I think when people saw Windows Recall, I think the idea of being able to search anything that ever showed up on your screen was really appealing to people. I am not surprised Apple didn't announce that this week, but I wouldn't be surprised if Apple takes some of those good ideas also and does them in a privacy preserving way. I think within 5 years, you'll be able to search across all of your Apple devices, and it'll remember things that have appeared on your screen, and you will not have to remember which device it was on, and you will be able to find it. Like, good ideas should be copied across the industry, right?
Yep.
And I do think that Apple, because of their sort of savvy in sort of design and marketing and communication, tends to shape the market a little bit more than other folks. So I do think that we'll see, like we were talking about with Google and the sort of private cloud compute, as much as it benefits them strategically, Google and Microsoft will copy some of these ideas as well.
Yeah, you talk about copying being good for the market. What is innovation but stealing and upgrading ultimately at the end of the day,
Exactly.
So, follow-up question, Adam. We see this strategy being employed by Apple where they're willing to work with other models, whether it be an OpenAI and ChatGPT 4.0 or a Perplexity or Anthropic or a Mistral from France. Do you think that ultimately moves the needle for some of these smaller models, knowing that there will be an unwillingness and inflexibility from like an Android and Gemini side of things to probably work with some of these other developers in the space?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're taking a nice aggregator position, allowing other third parties to plug in. Whether Google decides to or not, we'll have to see. Strategically, you could sort of make the argument either way. So it'll be interesting to see if they show up as an option. We know that Apple is talking to them, but all these startups who have sort of first-class models, I expect that they will be in talks with Apple as well. And it'll be interesting to see sort of how consumers respond, and if consumers have an opinion about which of these models, and it'll be interesting to see the reviews and sort of user tests as to how they work. But I think that Apple is, by taking that aggregator position, it lets them ride the wave of whoever has the best model, perhaps possibly except for Google, who may or may not be there. They can can commoditize the access to their user base that way and keep people using the iPhone and not wandering over to Android or new platforms, as the rumors of OpenAI possibly exploring making their own hardware. Now it seems unlikely that strategically makes sense.
I think what Apple just continues to do as we talk about and close the AI impact that they're going to have is they're really great at redefining the market. They move the mixed reality conversation to spatial computing. They're moving artificial intelligence to Apple Intelligence and personal intelligence. So I think that clever marketing, maybe it's coming out of that crack team, is ultimately allowing them to stand out from their subset, not only in their, capabilities, but also from a verbiage perspective. Moving beyond Apple Intelligence here, there's usually a huge focus on operating systems at WWDC, and 2024 was no different. On Mac OS Sequoia, which was the new one that was ultimately unveiled, two things stood out to me. Safari highlights. I thought that was really cool, being able to open up a table of content and a quick summary of the page that you were able to look at just by clicking that little notes icon in the URL bar. And then I also thought the video playback optimization was pretty cool. And by clicking the same part on Safari, that was able to open up a nice viewing experience for you in browser. And again, they took a little shot at Chrome, just talking about how much less battery percentage Safari ultimately sucks.
Yeah, for sure. The other thing that they spent a long time talking about that seems very niche and nerdy, but also very cool, was the math notes feature, where you could just sort of write out using your pencil on your iPad math equations and it would solve them for you. It can do pretty complex algebra. And there was graphing off of formulas as well. It's like it's nothing most people will ever use, but it makes for a really impressive demo.
Those need to be banned in school immediately. If kids these days didn't have enough to make their lives easier, the computational analysis, unbelievable. If you're ever looking for a table tennis coach too, I think that keynote speaker that appeared on screen has got her trajectories and angles down pat. I don't know if you saw that math notes demo, but whew. Besides some of those AI features, I think another prominently talked about Apple product was the Vision Pro. I think it got a pretty chunky segment at the top of the keynote presentation. As an Apple Vision Pro owner, Adam, what excited you most from some of those announcements?
I mean, honestly, the thing that I was the most excited about from the keynote was the improvements to the Mac display mode, basically giving you a way bigger screen to work with when you're using your Mac and your Vision Pro, just because that is one of the most important features right now. But I installed the beta, and a lot of honestly, it just feels faster. It feels more responsive, and they talked about this feature that I think everybody was skeptical about, that it could spatialize your existing photos, basically make them look three-dimensional in Vision Pro, and it works really well. I don't know how they're doing it. I thought at first it was, I was looking at some vacation photos, and I thought it was like, oh, it's using the LiDAR data from the phone or something. But no, I also was able to do it to some 20-year-old photos, and it still looked really good. So whatever AI secret sauce is going on there, very impressive.
Yeah, definitely one of the more impressive photos updates that were mentioned during the day. That machine learning application to create left and right eye view to create these dimensional photos, I thought was pretty spectacular. I also thought the ability on iOS to be able to search photos by incredibly specific details was super interesting. Like search for a photo of me, this person, and this person on this day wearing this specific outfit. And he was able to pull it up in a flash. So thought there was a lot of talk about the Photos apps, and obviously the immersion that's being brought to Vision Pro was one of the standout features. Speaking of immersion, though, one of the other notable announcements that they made was new immersive video content coming to the platform. I think one of the things was called Submerged, which is an Academy Award winning filmmaker, has a short that is appearing on the platform that takes advantage of some of this capture technology. But Adam, you actually sat in on an interview that happened on Vision Pro last night. How was that experience?
I think I witnessed the first live stream that happened in spatial video.
You were there.
It was not as impressive as I thought. I think it explains why Apple is not doing this yet. Everybody was very excited for Apple to be doing sports in live streaming sports matches in immersive video, but the quality, the picture quality was not as high. The resolution was not as high as like some of the pre-recorded stuff that Apple has shown off. And for whatever reason, it wasn't, and probably because they only announced earlier this week the tools that you would need to do this, it was not wraparound. It was like it was not a 180-degree view. It was sort of a 3D rectangle floating in space. That said, the spatial audio, which has been working and has been phenomenal for years now, was interesting. And I did find myself occasionally like laughing out loud at things in the way that you kind of laugh more when you're surrounded by other people who are laughing, but not when you're sitting on your couch at home by yourself. So there's some things were definitely tricking my brain into making me feel like more immersed. But I think this demo kind of explains why Apple's not doing it yet. I think it's not the technology for, and then the bandwidth, frankly, for live streaming is not up to their standards for that yet, unfortunately. What they did announce both prosumer level and professional level cameras and editing solutions for spatial video and Apple immersive video, which I had not really internalized the fact that there were actually two levels of those things, but there are. And I think up until now, it has all been coming from Apple, but they basically now we have the tools for other creators to start creating immersive content. So I think it'll be interesting to see more folks experimenting with this. As you said, Apple is going to have their sort of first scripted thing in Apple immersive video, but hopefully, this time next year, we'll have a lot of experiments with that content.
And excellent news on the creator front. I know Canon is making a camera, I think it was called the R7, that has the capability to shoot in this immersive format. And then it was Blackmagic Video, who's also creating a specified kind of camera in order to capture this immersive space stuff.
The Canon camera is sort of the prosumer version. It'll be better than quality than your iPhone camera. And then the Blackmagic one is like a $12,000 professional camera that can do the Apple immersive. So yeah, interested to see how this develops over time. I also, a thing that we talk about a lot is other venues that are using this similar formats, like the Sphere in Las Vegas and our friends at Cosm. It'll be interesting to see if the industry as a whole starts to converge on something like the Blackmagic camera, for example, as a standard solution for shooting immersive content.
Before we move on to some implications for brand marketers out there, just some other key announcements that piqued my interest, even though they might sound a little silly. Insight on Apple TV, just being able to see like the actor who's in the scene, what song is playing. I think that's a nice little quality of life upgrade and matches what Amazon's doing from an X-ray perspective. Interesting to see if they have e-commerce aspirations in that regard one day. Knockoff on an Ocean's movie, it seemed, with Brad Pitt and George Clooney in the Apple TV trailer. Some kind of heist duo between them, so it looks like they'll be getting up to their Rusty and Danny antics. And then the nodding along to AirPods to deny calls from grandma. I know I will be furiously shaking my head up and down to make that happen.
Yeah, that is a feature that sounds silly, but also, like, can you imagine if that goes wrong, where you try to shake your head and it interprets it wrong, and then you're accidentally talking to somebody you don't want to talk to?
How do you express ambivalence through head nodding? Do you really want to talk to grandma?
Yeah, I hope that's an opt-in feature, because I can imagine some people being accidentally answering phone calls that they don't want to be, or rejecting phone calls that they don't want to be.
The evolution of butt dialing, head accepting. I don't know. We'll work on the naming. But I did allude to some of those takeaways for brand marketer. Some of the interesting announcements, I thought, Ad Attribution Kit is replacing the SKA or SK Ad Network. I was just love big band references. This is going to change how ads are tracked on Apple devices. But some of the other things, Adam, what do you think about the potential Gen AI features for creating App Store ads?
Yeah, this hasn't been revealed yet. The video describing it is coming, I think, later this week. But there were some implied uses of Gen AI to help create assets for your App Store sort of landing page. It'll be interesting to see how that works. As we know, like this is a thing that Meta and Google have on their ad platforms to sort of recreate and then automatically A/B test creative. Interesting to see Apple sort of dipping their toes in that water as well.
As we bring the conversation to a close here, there are tons of small tidbits and takeaways for digital marketing implications. And if you want to find out more about that, you can head over to the IPG Labs Medium page and read the brilliant thought leadership piece put together by Richard Yao from our team, which delves a lot deeper into some of these key takeaways from WWDC 2024 and what you need to know from a brand marketing side of things. But before we say goodbye to our faithful listeners, Adam, I'm curious, what do you think marketers can learn from Apple's approach to AI?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've been saying since the beginning of the year that 2024 is the year where we're moving beyond AI hype and into actually productizing AI, where it's getting integrated into products that in many cases we're already using. And I think Apple is obviously one great example of that. This integration is going to bring generative AI to a much broader consumer base than has been using it before. And I think the message for other brands who are still thinking through their AI strategy is there is a way to engage with AI and bring it to consumers in meaningful ways while maintaining and sticking to your core value propositions. Apple figured out a way to deliver a lot of the features that they think users might want in a very privacy preserving way. So obviously not everybody has the resources of Apple to be able to do that. But in thinking through the strategy, it's like, what are your strengths? What do consumers really value in their relationship with you? There are ways to bring that to the AI conversation, and that AI does not have to be something coming out of left field. It can be sort of deeply integrated to your long-term strategy. And that is going to be sort of the most sound way to engage with AI for your consumers.
Well said, my friend. So as ever, thank you, Adam, for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you all for listening. You want more juice, pie, sauce, and other Apple goodness? You can find us on Twitter at IPG Lab and